except for Louisiana, also spend less per pupil. So what we're getting, we deserve a vastly better return on investment. We don't have a money problem, we have an alignment problem. And I look forward to talking about the next question, how I would realign the Department of Education to yield better results for kids and taxpayers. But what it will look like, decentralization, more opportunities for kids, more choices for parents, more charter schools. We have to be much further down the road to educational freedom. Some of our other states have gotten there, and we need to, it was great to have Amendment 1 passed. That was a great first step, but we have longer to go down that road. I would institute a financial integrity system, much like the state of Texas has. We have 0 markers for financial integrity in the state of Georgia in the way we spend our educational dollars. Texas has 20. Those 20 indicators are driving money into the classroom, away from bureaucracy, and they are keeping costs low while increasing results for kids. I would institute achievement districts like they have in the state of Tennessee. And in 10 years, I want Georgia to attract business because of, rather than in spite of, our education system. We have an 8-track system, and in 10 years, I want it to be an iPod system. Thank you.
I'd like to thank each candidate for staying on time. I appreciate that. Each candidate just told us why what he or she thinks the K-12 education system in Georgia should look like 10 years from now. Now I want to ask you, if the people of Georgia elect you state school superintendent, what would you do in that role to make your vision a reality? I want to give you one caveat. We have a room full of charter school educators. They're dedicated, they're also sophisticated. This is a sophisticated audience. I think they know that you can't appropriate money as state school superintendent. I think they know you can't pass a law as state school superintendent. But what would each of you do in your role as state school superintendent to make your vision a reality?
Okay, so we've talked about the purpose of education is to graduate self-sufficient, independent people who can positively impact our society. But what we need to remember is that the state school superintendent doesn't pass legislation. She doesn't make law. But, so my vision is, and I don't know that, well, I do know that I'm still in the schools. I'm still in the school systems. I'm still in with the kids. I speak teacher. I speak school. So I know what laws are good that come down, and I know what laws are not good that come down. I know what laws are good for our kids, and I know what laws are bad for our kids. So what we need to remember is that the state school superintendent needs to align herself with the governor's vision. She needs to look at and align herself also with the legislative dollars, work along with the State Board of Education, and then partner with the local school boards themselves and the governance boards themselves. And there's a 3-tier approach to that we need to remember and that we need to, or that I would implement. The one is to work with the legislature to revitalize and revamp our state funding for education. Right now, the Quality Basic Education formula, you need a master's in finance to read it. It doesn't work. So we need to figure out what is our per pupil spending and just go with that. Florida does it. They've got this beautiful little chart that you follow, and we're done. So that's one of the things. We need to either fund it or revamp it and work with the legislature to do that. I've also talked about implementing as much educational freedom as possible in support of the governor's vision and the legislative dollars. But when we're talking about legislative and legislation and educational policy, we've got this sort of broken down tiered system. So we need to ensure that the laws and the policy that are implemented are in accordance to the vision and the intent of the law and followed with fidelity. So we need to, instead of the state board interpreting the law and then passing it down to the local board who then interprets the law and then pass it down to the community and the specific schools that interpret the law, we need to make sure that that legislation that's being passed, A, is good for our kids, and we need to make sure that the legislature knows that, or that it's not good for our kids and that they know that, and that those laws and legislation and policy are being upheld with fidelity.
I love this question. I appreciate your caveat as someone who serves in the legislature and who does make laws and who is a member of the Appropriations Committee. I obviously have a very clear understanding of how this process works, which is why it's critical to have a superintendent who knows that experience, who has the relationships necessary, not necessarily to align with anyone else's vision, but to have a vision for where education needs to be now and in 10 years and in 15 years and 20 years. It's using those relationships to set appropriations that are necessary to meet the needs of students. It's making sure that we have the laws in place and then promulgate those rules and policies, working directly with school districts, working directly with local schools, again, to make sure we're meeting the needs of students. And so specifically, I want to talk about those three things that I mentioned. Number one is we talk about having great teachers and leaders in every school and classroom in every school. It's utilizing the Department of Education to ensure that we are attracting and retaining the best and brightest educators, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, looking at our compensation model, thinking outside of the box. We know that in 10 years, 50% of our teaching force will be changing. And so we've got to be prepared for that and have the right policies in place to attract and retain the best and brightest. Secondly, using the Department of Education as a resource for parents and community members. And so creating what I'm calling the Parent University Center, where faith organizations and businesses can come and be trained and be certified so that they will have the information they need to deliver to parents. And so rather than parents having to navigate going to a school system or going to the Department of Education to figure out all of the acronyms, they'll be able to get that training and they'll understand what Common Core is and how to use Khan Academy and all the other resources that are available for parents from people that they trust in their communities. And then thirdly, in terms of technology and innovation, I talked about creating the Office of Innovation in the Department of Education. And so with that, I envision having educators have the opportunity to apply for grants, to do cool and innovative things in their classrooms and in their schools. That's how we're going to find the best ideas. That's how we're going to be able to replicate great things that are happening in our schools. At the end of the day, what we need is an advocate. And I want to continue to do what I've done in the legislature, which is to work across the aisle, work across racial and party lines, and do what it takes to meet the needs of our students so that they're prepared for the 21st century.
Thank you, Alicia, not only for your kind words, but I just wrote down on my paper to be an advocate. And it's so true. To sit in the state school superintendent's job, you must be an advocate. An advocate for the kids, an advocate for the community, an advocate for our future here. Now, I was thinking through this, I thought to myself, first thing I would do is, as a state school superintendent, is what I do when I start a business, is you have to have a plan. And if you go on my website at fitzjohnson.us, I have a thorough plan on my website. I can't sit here and go through the whole plan with you, but I'll tell you it's very thorough, and I believe it will get us where we need to be. As I thought through the plan as well, I thought about, we have to make sure that the governor's office, our legislature, our community, our business leaders, and our state board of education, we want to make sure we're on the same sheet of music. Now, are we all going to agree on every step of the way? No. But we have to agree that we're going to put our students first and make sure that that is our priority. So when I look at this, when I say, what would I do to make it work? I got to have a plan. The other thing I have to listen. I have to listen to some experts like you. I was sitting in one of the breakout sessions this morning, and I was thinking, my goodness, this is some complicated stuff. And there's some guys in here, there's some conversations going on in this room. I couldn't participate. I sure couldn't listen. And I could hear the passion in the voices of the folks that were engaged in that discussion. And so I would surround myself with experts. There were some that are already in the DOE, some that I would find, some maybe sitting right here. But you surround yourself with experts to execute your plan. And then in the end, I say it's about leadership. And leadership's transferable. And I spent my time, in the military, my 21 years in the military. I have a master's degree in education. I have a law degree. When I talk about experience, when I talk about leadership, those are the types of things that I would use to further the education here in the state of Georgia. Thank you.
Well, I really like
this question too, and I think we have to answer it from a position of honesty and just acknowledge that the role of the state school superintendent at the end of the day has very little, in my view, to do with what happens in your individual classroom and your individual school system. So I think we have to start there and just be honest about that. You know, from my perspective as somebody who deals with local education, in fact, the biggest barrier to our ability to be successful in many ways has been too much intervention from the state legislature and too much intervention on the part of the Department of Education. So I think we have to start there first. And what I can tell you is we have a lot of good things going on around the state of Georgia, and what I want to do is stop mandating things and requiring things and getting in the way of progress and start recognizing school systems and charter schools and places where things are already happening that are successful. We need to get out of those people's way and start working with the systems and the schools and the teachers who may need some additional support. So I think that's first and foremost. I mean, the state school superintendent role is very important, but it's important for a different reason than I think, you know, maybe some other people will talk about, because it's a job where you have to have influence in many ways without authority. You know, a book that I'm reading right now and is from Simon Sinek, and you may have read it or heard about it, and it's this whole idea of starting with why. I think one of the things that we have to do in Georgia is we have to have a complete paradigm shift. And the state school superintendent has to be the chief champion. It's a sales job at this point. We have to be out there advocating for different ways for kids to learn. And what I can tell you for me is, if we're going to be successful, the state school superintendent cannot be about protecting these old constituencies. And that means the Georgia School Boards Association, it means the Superintendents Association, PAGE, GAE, the legislature, or anybody else who gets in the way. We have to be about educating kids, implementing new strategies, new technologies to get the job done, and make sure that the only thing that matters is individual student success. And that's what I care about. Thank you.
Again, as an individual who's worked in the school system now for 22 years, you know, if we're going to have to sustain change and make the gains that we need to make, you know, for my role, or see my role as a state school superintendent, is that, you know, I'm there to be a servant. And I'm there to be a servant to you in the local schools, you know, at the local level, to make sure you have the resources, make sure you have the personnel, make sure you have the time, you know, that you need to do to close the door and do the job that you were made to do, and that's to teach. You know, that's the bottom line. You know, for me as an individual, when I look at things that, whether it's legislation, whether it's policy across the board, you know, it really needs to be seen through the vision of the classroom. Because that, as I shared before, that is where education takes place. And we have to make sure that is it having a positive impact on student learning in the classroom? You know, is it having a positive impact on the teacher's ability to teach? And so when we're out there, I mean, that means you have to be the advocate, but you have to be the defender. You have to be the person that stands in the gap as well. But I think in order to do that, you have to have the wisdom, you have to have the experience to know what you're facing, to understand whether it is positive, to understand whether it is negative. And I think that's very critical as you look at all of us as candidates. You know, who has the best experience to come through there? You know, this is something that, for me, over the past 22 years, I've experienced at the site level. And so I understand what a policy means. I understand what change means. And so we have to look at that. But also as an individual, what I do believe in being a servant, I have to make sure that, you know, I kind of tell people, you know, God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth. So that means I need to listen twice as long as I talk. And so I need to make sure that I'm listening and I'm hearing what you know, all the partners in education are saying. And that means bringing them all together so that we can be on the same page, so that we all can work together. You know, because our common cause is kids. You know, and that is what, you know, the passion that drives me and has driven me for, you know, since probably 18 years of age. And so as we come together and we look at this, this is what it needs to be. You know, are we doing the job in the classroom? Are we hindering? Or are we accelerating and make sure we are succeeding? And so let's look at that, be very methodical about it, but also have the individual that's in place that has the wisdom and knowledge to make those critical decisions when it comes down, you know, at the end of the day. Thank you.
So the question is, what would I do as superintendent to affect the changes I want to see for the state of Georgia in those 10 years? We've heard a lot, well, the state school superintendent can do this, they can't do that, they can work. So obviously, The state school superintendent needs to work with the legislature and the governor to have a unified philosophy and program going forward. That is very important to do that. We do need to reform the funding formula. That is absolutely a necessary thing that needs to happen if we're going to get out of this 8-track system into our iPod world. And yes, we've heard one of the candidates talk about the complexity. It is very complex. And that's pursuant to the way the bureaucrats like it. They want you to think it's complex so they can perpetuate the cost of the bureaucracy. So you need to elect someone, you have to choose very carefully who your state school superintendent's going to be, that they understand the complexity and they can't have the wool pulled over their eyes about these issues. And specifically, what would I do to realign the bureaucracy? Well, the state school superintendent brings policies and brings action items to the state board. I will make sure they pass through my 2 filters, kids and taxpayers. Are they good for kids? Are they good for taxpayers? Or is this yet another bureaucratic ploy that's going to make it difficult for charter schools to get funded? Or is it going to make it more difficult to have more charter schools? Those are the types of things I'm going to filter out that right now do not get filtered out. I intend to bring reforms to the state board that will incentivize funding for decentralization. These are things the state bureaucracy can do with the right leader. And I intend to bring forth policies that will make sure Georgians get better disclosure, timely disclosure, of how their educational dollars are spent. Right now, if you went to the state website, you'd only find fiscal information that was 3 years old. Also, as of January 15th, Georgia became the first and only state to lose almost $10 million in Race to the Top funding. That's simply unacceptable. It's not professional. And if Nancy Jester, if I'm elected state school superintendent, you will not find that happening. Talk is cheap. We have to understand how the bureaucracy works to realign it. So those are some of my plans to get us to that iPod world in 10 years.
Thanks again for staying on time. Ms. Jester, please keep the microphone. We're going to start from that end and come this way on these last 2 questions. The next question requires only a one-word answer, yes or no. And then the 4th question, you'll be able to explain for 3 minutes why you said yes or no. So the yes or no question. Did you vote for Amendment 1, the Charter School Amendment, in November 2012? In November 2012, there was a statewide referendum determining whether the state of Georgia should be allowed to authorize charter schools separately from local boards of education. And then the 4th question will allow each candidate 3 minutes to explain why he or she voted yes or no on Amendment 1, the Charter Schools Amendment. So we'll start with you, Ms. Jester. Yes or no, did you vote for the Charter Schools Amendment in November 2012?
And do you want me to answer the why or just
No, just the yes or no, and then we'll come back.
Yes, of course I did. Of course, yes.
Mr. Woods?
No, I did not.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Morgan?
Yes.
And Ms. Willis?
Yes, I do.
So you want me to answer why I did that, correct?
So please explain why, for 3 minutes each, please explain why you voted the way you did.
Well, I believed it was in the best interest of children and taxpayers. Those are my 2 filters. Plus, my background my education is in economics, and so I know you improve things not by centralization and bureaucracy, but by competition. And I'm a parent. I have 3 children in public school today, and I know that I am the ultimate arbiter of what I want for them. And I want to empower parents to be able to exercise their authority in their children's lives. There is no one-size-fits-all. The more you go around and talk to parents, the more you know that. You don't have to go and shop at a grocery store assigned to you because of your zip code. So that assignment of school may work for you, may work for some of your children, might not work. So I mean, it was just common sense. In no other aspect of our lives are we forced into the desires of a bureaucracy more so than what we see in how we assign children to schools. So I'm a big fan of the charter movement. I worked hard to get it passed. I blogged, I wrote, I rallied, just like I discussed, and it is just one step in the march to educational freedom and parent empowerment. It is one step that will help control costs of bureaucracy. It is one step that helps return control of schools and classrooms to the teachers and the parents that are in that school community. It is, it's absolutely a conservative idea. It's pro-parent, it's pro-taxpayer. What's not to love? So, of course, I voted yes, and I'm so proud of Georgia for passing this amendment. It's one thing we did in the march that we've got to keep continuing on with.
You know, kind of the odd man out here. But when I look at that, you know, the reason I voted against, you know, the amendment itself, you know, and I look back at, you know, 3 simple words: we the people. For me, it was a constitutional issue. It was an issue that, you know, as being a history teacher, something that I taught government, you know, for many years with my kids, that I feel that we have to, you know, respect the rule of law. And we have to respect what is written not only in our U.S. Constitution, but also the Georgia State Constitution. And again, going, you know, within Article 8 of our Georgia Constitution, it specifically deals with, you know, public education and where the authority, you know, should arrive or stay at, and that's at the local level, and specifically at the local state school board or at the local, your local system board. And that's, you know, the issue that I had with the amendment itself. That, you know, I felt that we did not need, again, being a conservative, you know, myself, we did not need to have what I felt was a repetitive form of governance that we already had. We also, as we look at this, is that, you know, that we created and expanded government in a sense, you know, by another board. And then we have, you know, an unelected, you know, body or board itself. And for me as an individual, you know, those were things that, you know, I feel very strongly about. That we live in a federal democracy, you know, a representative form of democracy. You know, yes, change does take time, and elections do matter. You know, we see that. And that's why I've always encouraged people at the local level that when you look at their school board members, you know, don't look just at your member, but look at the member next door as well. Because that's where coalition business, you know, and things take place. But that being said, the people of Georgia spoke. And I think we did the right thing going through the process, the legislative, you know, means. I have no problems with that. And so now, as I look at it, where do we go from here as your next state school superintendent? You know, you now have, you know, state charter schools. And so that means I need to make sure that as your next state school superintendent, I fight just as hard for you to make sure you have the resources, make sure you have the money, make sure you have the personnel to do the job. Because at the bottom line, you're teaching our kids, and we have to have that commitment. So again, it was not a vote against charter schools. It was not a vote against the charter, you know, process, which I admire great. I think within Georgia, one of the things we did is that we moved to a one-size-fits-all mentality and no child left behind, and we started dropping the choice and actually the charter, you know, environment that we once had in our great state. So we will work that, and we will make the commitment, and I promise you as your next state school superintendent, you know, I will work hard to make sure you have the resources you need. Thank you.
Well, there's some people who know me out of the audience, and I would be remiss if I didn't, you know, in full disclosure, say that for me, the path to school choice has been a bit of a personal journey. You know, and this is the one paradox I guess I've had in my Republican versus educational selves. And, you know, I just didn't have my, I wasn't looking outside of my own situation enough, just to be perfectly frank with you. You know, I'm the son of an educator. The schools where we live have always been very good. I felt like the education that I had in public schools was very positive. So for a long time, I felt like, you know, we're doing a pretty good job. I don't know that we need a lot of these other choices. But over time, I really changed that mentality. And where I landed is that the system is broken. And after 3 terms as a school board member, what I can tell you is I've seen it firsthand. We have an environment right now where, and I'm a huge local control person, so please don't misunderstand that, but we have a law and a situation where we have allowed local school boards to deny charter applications, not on their merits, but as a funding mechanism. And as I continued to look at that and started thinking about that, the conclusion that I came to is that's not right. And as a parent, we have 3 children in public schools, and as I said, I'm very proud of the schools that we have in Bartow County, but there are places around the state that if my wife and children and I were forced to live there, I would want options as a parent. And if that's the way I feel as a parent, I had no choice but to support the charter amendment and to support the process that we've all gone through. Because here's what I know, looking at charter schools, and I've had a chance to visit some of them. But it's more than the facilities, it's more than the teachers. What you guys have been able to do is to create a sense of ownership and a team entrepreneurial environment because of that choice that makes it so different than the schools that kids live in simply based on their zip code. And I think more than anything else, it's that idea, this idea of belonging and choice and ownership that has made charter schools so successful. And what I hope comes out of all of this is that we can take some of that and bring it into the traditional school environment so that all kids have the opportunity to learn, grow, and achieve based on the innovative things that you're doing in these kind of laboratories of experimentation that we have in education right now. Because if we leave traditional schools to do it on their own, it's going to take so much longer. You guys are pushing the process, you're pushing the system, and I thank you for it.
Thank you, Matt. I voted yes for the amendment because I believe it's another tool in the kit bag for public education here in Georgia. We talk about one size doesn't fit all. I am an advocate, I am sincerely real passion for the community getting involved in helping our students and helping our schools achieve. You know, when you find a community, when parents get involved, when businesses get involved, and our educators are right on top of it, as we know they are, all getting involved and taking back that school and saying, our school is going to be the best. Now I know when I move, one of the first things I think about is, well, you know, how are the schools? And we make decisions as parents on how the schools are. If I have a choice, I'm going to go into a good school district. And how that school district becomes good is the folks out here. Our educators, our communities, our business leaders, all getting together. And in charter schools, that's the model. So it's another piece, it's another choice. Now, I'm not anti-public schools, but I love the public schools. Okay, I'm just saying that that's another piece that we can use to move our education system forward in Georgia. And I applaud you for it. And that is why I voted yes for charter schools. Thank you.
I definitely voted yes for the amendment because I'm one of the co-sponsors of the amendment. So I certainly needed to vote for the very thing that I worked extremely hard to help get passed. And let me tell you why I voted yes and worked hard in particular. Because I watched Ivy Preparatory Academy and I watched Fulton Leadership Academy and other schools across the state get denied, and that was just unacceptable. I sat in the Supreme Court room when the decision came down, when we were hearing the arguments in support of keeping Ivy Prep open, and I watched how those little girls in green jackets, as I call them, and spoke about them on the House floor the day of the debate. I got tired of watching how 1 year their school would be open and the next year was facing closure and the next year. And despite all of those challenges, they continue to achieve at high levels. And so what that taught me was when we invest our time and our efforts in making sure that kids have access to a great education, we as adults have responsibility to put the policies and laws in place to make sure that that can be replicated across the state. And so I will never forget election night when many of you in this room were with me at Ivy Prep waiting for those results to come back. And even though there were several races that we were all concerned about and may have been on different places and wanted different outcomes, we were together that night on the passage of Amendment 1. And that says to me that when we work together across party lines, across racial lines, across geographic lines, all for the sake of kids, we can do great things for the students of Georgia. And so anytime there's a fight, when it's about kids and when it's about parents, you can count on me to always be on the front lines. And so I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of Amendment 1. I am proud even of some of the challenges that we've overcome. I remember some of the friends that I've lost as a result of that fight, but for all the friends that I lost, I gained a lot more friends in this movement because of the work that we've done together. And so, again, I'm proud of the work. I'm proud that we were victorious. And it's all because of those little girls in green jackets, those young men at Fulton Leadership Academy, and all those other schools that deserve to be open so that kids will have access to a great education.
Thank you. Yes, I voted for the amendment. And the reason that I did is because I believe that we as Americans have the responsibility to open up as much educational choice for our children as possible, for our parents as possible. The Charter Amendment afforded people and collective groups of individuals to pursue academic excellence for their children, to pursue parent and student choice. There was more teacher freedom involved in that. There was more teacher choice involved in that. But with all of that, too, came more accountability. I do have to say, though, that I am a proponent of teachers and I am a proponent of children. I'm a teacher. And when I hear things from my other candidates, and I'm bothered by hearing that the system is broken and that traditional school teachers are horrible, and I can't abide by that. I have to say that teachers are the heroes of this state, and I actually bore witness to that on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon and morning. And I think we owe all of our teachers and all of our school leaders and all of our educators actually a round of applause for doing what they do for our children every day. But the biggest thing that I think the amendment has done for our children is that we have stopped the blame game. Charter schools have parents and community members and teachers and leaders all working together for our children instead of everybody pointing a finger going, well, the parents don't do this, well, the teachers don't do this, well, the community's not involved. But when you have a charter school and a charter system involved together, working together, there's no more blame. Everybody's got skin in the game and everybody's doing what's best for the kids.
I'd like to thank all of our candidates for coming today, for giving very thoughtful and forthright answers. And thank you for putting yourself out there. Great personal sacrifice to run for a statewide office. So thank you.